Well, if you came in today, you probably saw we have some brand new booklets that our team has been writing for the last 6 months to take you through a journey in the study of Esther. So grab one of those on your way out today. Also, today would be a great day to sign up for groups. We have a variety of groups that we'll be studying at different times during the week to be a companion to what we're going through here this morning. For those of you who weren't here last week, we summarized the entire 7 chapters of Esther through a one-man drama. If you want to pick that up, that'll give you a summary of where the whole story has gone if you weren't here. For those of you who enjoyed it, I got to fulfill one of my bucket list moments. I finally got to be the bearded lady. All these years, I have hope for that. So thank you for the nice compliments there. Today we're going to be looking at Esther chapter 1, specifically looking at some decisions that Vashti made. As we do that, the theme we're going to look at in this opening week is that often our toughest calls as leaders, as parents, our toughest calls usually occur down the toughest halls, the toughest seasons in our life. A lot of friends over the years have made some tough calls and some tough hauls. A friend who had to set some boundaries with their spouse who was giving into an addiction, and after years of setting boundaries, he had to make the tough call of ultimately leaving the woman he loved because she refused to give up the addiction over their family. Another friend who went through a very difficult winter season in his marriage where he didn't feel like, probably objectively, that his wife even liked him. It was during that season he had a lot of opportunities to be unfaithful, and yet he chose to continue to be faithful even in the midst of a winter season of his marriage. And as that marriage came out of winter into spring, that tough call and a tough haul has solidified the next 10 years of their marriage because of his commitment to faithfulness. I know other friends who made decisions that when their career was on the fast track up, they decided to slow down that fast track to choose what was vital, their marriage and family, over that which was important, their career. It seemed crazy to the people around them, but it was a tough call and a tough haul. And many of us had moments when we have come to a situation that we had to do something that was right, even though it would hurt somebody we loved. Our kids with discipline, a family member who was an addict that we had to say no to, a friend who no longer could fulfill the positions that we hired for and we had to let them go. It was in these tough hauls that character was built. It was in these tough hauls that we began to see God do work in us. One of the toughest ones that we had around Horizon over the years was 5 years ago. I found myself walking into a New York hotel to meet with Mike Huckabee. We'd just gotten to a new building, and I had felt compelled to write a book 2 years earlier, and so the manuscript was floating around, and I'd gotten a call from Mike Huckabee's son, his manager, and asked me to come to New York to meet with Mike. Didn't know who Mike was really, beyond knowing he had a TV show and radio show. At the end of the conversation, he said, "I read your manuscript. This will be the #1 debated book next year. I want to co-author this book with you. I've got a TV show. I've got bus lined up for the way I do my book tours. Every one of my books, or most of them, have been bestsellers, New York bestsellers. And if you partner with me on this, this will be the most debated book in the next 2 years." I was humbled. I appreciated meeting him. I said, "Well, let me go back and talk with our team." Came back to our team, the elders and exec board of the church, and we began to just have a very robust discussion on the pros and cons of getting the message out, having a potential bestseller, and yet we also weighed the downside of connecting to anyone who even used to be a politician. Automatically you get politicized, your organization gets politicized, and your message gets politicized. After a robust discussion, we ultimately decided as a team to turn down that offer. And here we are 5 years later, and we made a tough call in a very tough haul with pros and cons on all sides. And it was in that tough call, what made the decision easier, despite how tough it was, is that none of us in that room were addicted to fame. So that didn't color our decision. And we knew, and even 5 years later, I was so glad to have a team of people who could talk through that issue together, and that we could say, whatever decision we make, we trust that God is working behind the scenes. So whether we go this direction or that direction, ultimately, this is in God's hands. Tough call in a tough hall. When you come to a tough situation, you're going to find that that unique situation is going to bring up what the real idols are in your life, the real kings in your life. And you're going to ask yourself, can I really trust that there's a God who's sovereign, who's in control? And it is no coincidence that your toughest calls almost always happen in your toughest halls. And we ask God to get us out of these kind of circumstances, right? Make life easier. And yet God develops our faith in times when we're going through difficult times, and certainly God develops us most in times when He's even silent. In the book of Esther, we find that to be true. We're going to get three toughest moments: toughest halls, toughest calls, and ultimately the toughest question. And my hope for you is that you can find what we have found, what I have found, is that fear doesn't have to drive your decisions. That doesn't mean you don't feel it. But the sense that God is with you, even when He's silent, can be even more real than your fear. More than that, I hope you can begin to realize that even in times God's silent, you can have confidence that God has your back, that He's working silently in the background. Let's begin with a tough haul. And chapter 1 of Esther is certainly a tough haul. To remind you where we are in biblical narrative, this is a summary of the entire back half of the Old Testament. We had King Saul, King David, King Solomon. The kingdom is divided into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom is conquered by Assyria, and then the mighty Babylonians come along and conquer Assyria and conquer the southern kingdom. And God has put His people back together again. The Babylonians, where we learned about the book of Ezekiel, are then conquered by the Persians. And the Persians, who've now conquered Babylon, have absorbed all of the Jewish people because they were POWs, so to speak, of the Babylonians. And now, since Persia doesn't have any particular problem with the Hebrews, they allow them to return to the land. So Cyrus the Great, in 539 BC, allows God's people to return to their land. However, not everyone returns. Many of the people living in Persia, Hebrews, they know no other life except living in Persia and Babylon. They don't want to go back to some land that Grandma and Grandpa used to live in, and so they stay in Persia, against God's advice and God's command. So here we have Esther, and here we have Mordecai, who did not obey God and return with Ezra and Nehemiah to the land. So here in the kingdom of Persia, we find a lot of imperfect people, Esther being one, Mordecai being one, who are now coming face to face with danger in the kingdom of darkness that is Persia. And now, Cyrus the Great is succeeded by Xerxes in 486 BC, which is where we find ourselves here in the book of Esther. And this is a tough haul in history. There's still exiles. It is a tough haul for Vashti, who's going to have to take a stand in one of the toughest halls in history. Why is it tough? Well, she's married to a bipolar narcissist. Here's what the ancient historian Herodotus said about Xerxes. Xerxes, his Hebrew name Ahasuerus, was the most handsome, the most regal, and the most dignified. Doesn't sound too bad. He was stately. He was royal-bearing. But emotionally and morally, he was capable of unpredictable extremes. As long as you were with him and for him and did what he wanted, he was your best friend. But you take a stand against him, and he had unpredictable extremes. His vast resources, gigantic notions, and notorious temper made him the awe of the ancient world, because no one messes with Xerxes. And the book opens by showing just how vast his power and empire are. It came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, Persian name Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces. I mean, the empire is ginormous. It's covering from India to Ethiopia. In the third year of his reign, he makes a feast. And this feast is designed to prepare his generals and officers for his ultimate conquest, to take over the empire of Greece. So this party he throws is basically a PR campaign to let his officers know he has the power and the money to finance a war against Greece. He shows his power and he shows the vastness of his kingdom. So he shows, mostly his army, the riches of his glorious kingdom, the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days. He throws a party. How long is the party? 180-day long party. Now that's a party. And not only that, everything is paid for by him, and he throws a feast. At the end of a 100-day party, he throws another bigger 7-day party to show them just how much power he has. And when these days, 180, were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan, the capital city, from great to small. So before it was for the officers, now it's for everyone. And it was in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There's white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen, purple on the silver rods and marble pillars, and the couches were made of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, white, and black marble. And notice again, we learn about his character from his feast. It continues. And they served everyone drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other. Custom designed cups, every single one of them. With royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. And here the idea of 2 kings and 2 kingdoms gets introduced. Because Xerxes is a king who's willing to be generous to all as long as you recognize he's the center of the universe. He's willing to care for you, be nice to you, draw you in as long as you are helping him get what he needs and wants. In fact, in accordance with the law, the drinking was not even compulsory. So if you had a moral objection to drinking, the king ordered you didn't have to. He told his officers of the household that everyone could do according to his own pleasure. I'm not going to make you do anything. This guy seems gracious. He seems kind. He seems generous. But he is a classic narcissist. He draws you in through all the graciousness, and as long as you're helping him accomplish his agenda, which is ultimately defeating Greece, he is going to be the nicest guy you've ever met. But don't stand against him or question him or no longer become a commodity for his real goal, and he will be discarded. And Vashti is going to have to stand up against this guy whose anger is legendary. She's going to have to take a stand against a man who doesn't let anyone take a stand against him. But before we talk about Vashti's tough call, I want to talk about Xerxes for a moment. Because Xerxes is in a tough hall. It doesn't look very tough. It looks pretty comfortable. But here's why this is a tough hall. What has happened in his life up to this moment is leading him to a defeat between chapter 1 and chapter 2. He is going to be devastated by the Greeks. It's going to be the most humiliating moment in his life. And yet, he could have prepared for it. He could have had some warning about it, but he didn't. And here's why. The toughest hall we find ourselves in life is the one Xerxes finds himself in. And the toughest hall is success. Success will be the toughest hall you find yourself in. Why? Because number one, as you get more and more successful, it blinds you to your own arrogance. No one calls you on your misbehavior. No one questions your decisions. You have less and less feedback, and you more and more start to buy into your own press. This 180-day party has convinced Xerxes that he's already defeated the Greeks, which has kept him from accurately assessing how powerful they are. The toughest hall of success blinds us to access to anything but confirmation bias feedback. If Xerxes comes to you at the party, he's just given you all this wine, he's just told you his dream is to defeat the Greeks, and he says, "Do you think I can do it?" What are you going to say? "I don't think we're really up to it." Have you seen my gallows? And the problem with success is the higher you go in success in your life, the harder and harder and harder it is to get honest, good feedback. You only get feedback that comes to you through a confirmation bias. What do you want to hear? And that is why success is the toughest haul, because it's harder and harder to get truth about yourself. It's harder and harder to get truth from other people. It blinds our eyes and it deafens our senses. More than that, success creates an environment that allows us to do whatever we want, with whoever we want, without much accountability. And that is where Xerxes is. He can do whatever he wants, with whoever he wants. But the biggest problem with success, and God advocates success, He doesn't advocate failure, but He says as you get successful, you need to double down on being surrendered to me. It is the toughest haul. Because it's when we're in success that we inflate our view of ourselves. I did this. Look how smart I am. Wow, this company needs me. Wow, this family needs me. Wow, this marriage is so grateful to have me. We inflate our view of ourselves and we deflate our view of God. And that is why God says that pride comes before destruction. Because success is the toughest haul. And into that, Vashti has to make a tough call. Queen Vashti also, while that was going on, is throwing another feast for all the dignitaries coming from around the world to Persia. She throws a feast for the women in the royal palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the seventh day of the seventh-day party that followed the 180-day party, the king is drunk as a skunk, is what the Hebrew says here. When the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded. In a moment where he's buying his own press, in a moment that he's sort of lost his faculties after a 7-day moment of drunkenness, it's then he comes up with another great idea. Is this a great idea, guys? That's a great idea, Xerxes. All right. I'm going to command my eunuchs to go get my wife. Have you seen my wife? She is beautiful. And he commands them to bring Queen Vashti before the king and the officers, wearing her royal crown. And the implication is she's only wearing her crown in order to show her beauty to the people and the officers, for she was beautiful to behold. And now we have Vashti's tough call. Surrounded by generals and dignitaries and officers and warriors, the king is going to command that the queen come and dance before them all. In this moment, you might say, well, that's an easy decision. That's not a tough call. I'm not going to be objectified like that. Really? Maybe it's easy in modern America to think this is an easy decision, and maybe not. Think of how easy it is to do a little flirting if it means maybe it advances your career or gets you connected a little bit. But here in Persia, this was the toughest of calls. This is a man who always got what he wants. This is the ruler of the known world, and anyone who comes against him is banished or killed. So Vashti's got to weigh her options. A little bit of objectivity, a little bit of dancing, which quite frankly in Persia would probably make her even more famous and popular than ever. Her fame would probably go up. Maybe she'd lose some dignity, sure. But the option of not doing it meant losing her position, her power, her house, her influence, and everything in between. She's going to have to make the toughest of calls. And all of us are going to find ourselves in situations, and though it may be easy for you to make this decision in this environment, I would imagine that whatever situation you call your tough haul, the reason it's tough for you is because in that moment it speaks to something that is your real king. And Vashti's going to have to ask herself, is my real king the forces that will objectify me, or is my real king the one who says that I do not need to be objectified? What's more important in your tough call? Is it your lifestyle? Is it your comfort? Is it your position? Is it your success? You will need to weigh that against the sacrifices this kingdom asks of you. And the Bible speaks of a way in which we can, like Vashti, stand up to a kingdom of darkness. And the only way I know to stand up against a kingdom that's this powerful is to know of another kingdom. The only way to stand up to a king this powerful is to know of another king. And there's another type of king that's working behind the scenes. And this king has a totally different value system. This king is more powerful than that king, though he doesn't look it right now. This king is the one that gives us the power to stand up against the kingdom of darkness. You see, in Xerxes' kingdom, you are valuable if you make the king look good. And as long as you're a general that can help him succeed, you will be advanced. But the minute you're no longer valuable to the king, the minute you don't make the king look good, you're no longer valuable to him. And this queen, as long as she makes the king look good, she's valuable. The minute she doesn't make the king look good, she'll be banished. Contrast that with God's kingdom. You're not valuable if you make the king look good. You're valuable because the king is good. Because the king is good. You are not valuable because of your quarterly numbers. You're not valuable because of your savings account. You're not valuable because how much money you can make. You're not valuable because how big your house is. Those are all important things. Those are good things. But they don't define your value in this kingdom. And this is a question we've all got to ask ourselves, because when you're in a tough hall, you're going to begin to ask yourself, what's my real kingdom? And if this is your real kingdom, you will sacrifice and bow down to this kingdom. You'll sacrifice your integrity. You'll sacrifice your marriage. You'll sacrifice your family. You will make decisions in this kingdom to serve your real king unless you have another king. Which brings us to the toughest question. The toughest question that Vashti will ask is the one that you and I will ask. What choice will we make if we could count on coincidence? The series of Esther is a series of coincidences that God works in. You could call them God incidences, that He is setting up positions and people and situations to accomplish an end game. But it is often we, like Vashti, don't get to see the end game. We don't get to see the strategy. We just see we're surrounded and it doesn't look like there's anyone to help. And yet Vashti will make a decision to count on coincidence. That somehow, somewhere, her decision to sacrifice all this will be worth refusing the king. Now, the king is the opposite. He's not going to count on coincidence. Why would anyone do that? That's foolish. I'm a self-made man. I've created my own destiny. Only fools believe in an invisible God who works behind the scenes. I don't count on coincidence, he might say. I count on myself. And when she refused to come, and she did refuse, the king was furious. The same gracious, kind king just a few verses ago. He is furious. And his wrath raged against her, and she was banished off the board. Why is that? Because in his kingdom, if you no longer help him get what he wants, you went from a someone to a something. And this is a thing worth considering for all of us. I can't tell you, over the years as pastoral staff, we have seen people on their career path, and as they go up, they end up destroying and discarding the very things they said they wanted to do all this for. I have a friend who had a career goal. And as he had this career goal, the minute the company no longer served that career goal, it was like time to switch companies. I mean, like, I'm all for goals. I'm a goal setter. But all of a sudden, the company became a means to an end. And if it didn't serve the means to an end, I'm done with it. And that same mindset that makes us good at achieving is the same mindset I have seen time and time and time again. That you swap spouses and you swap houses because if that person no longer gets me what I want, no longer gets me the pleasure I want, no longer gets me the goals I have, everyone becomes dispensable, something to be discarded and something to be destroyed. And that person would never say they would do that. In fact, the reason they were doing this is for those things. And now they sacrifice those things because this kingdom and this king has become their God. And I would encourage you, Xerxes, if he looked in the wake of his life, he would see carnage. And I would encourage you, success is one of those things that keeps us from seeing the truth. When you look into the wake of your life, do you see any patterns? Do you see in your personal life, in your professional life, in your family life, the carnage of people, broken friendships, broken partnerships, broken marriages, broken relationships, and every time, and I remember we used to be so close, you'd say. I remember we used to be really good friends, you'd say. But you start to noticing how often people got discarded, and you've made the exception to the rule, but it's applied in every area of your life. Different personalities, different ages. It might speak to this problem you may have, and I may have. When we turn someone into a something, it's because we've made the universe as big as ourselves. And success has become our toughest haul. And the toughest call we might make is to look honestly in the mirror and say, God, I have got to come to grips with the fact that I really do everything to serve myself. Even my giving, even my charitable good works are about making myself look good, which is why secret giving and secret charitable works will speak to who your real God is. This is so devastating for Xerxes that out of his drunken stupor, he decides to discard someone that we find out he does have some affection for and actually some love for. Love. But then in chapter 2, which we'll mention next week in more detail, it says, after these things, when the wrath of King Xerxes subsided. I'll show you next week, but after these things is 4 years later. That's a long bit of bitterness. After 4 years of bitterness, 4 years, by the way, at the time which he'll be defeated by the Greeks and get some humility. It's during those 4 years of humiliation he comes face to face on maybe I can't just count on myself. Maybe I need to stop buying my own press. It is then, in this moment of humiliation, he remembered Vashti by name. She was no longer a thing that was discarded. She was the one person in his life who actually treated him like a human being. And he remembered what she had done, and that what had been decreed against her was not fair. And someone had become something for 4 years, and he went, what have I done to something I cared about? And while he's reflecting on that, Vashti's got to make this decision. And she's going to count on coincidence. And here's the thing. She's not going to see the ramifications. She's not going to know, as far as the Bible tells us, in her whole life how God uses this moment. But God uses her decision to stand up to evil and to being objectified to set the stage for a pawn named Esther to make her way to the end of the board and become the next queen. And that moment, how God uses her decision to set up this queen, to sit in the Persian army, the Persian kingdom, to end up rescuing the entire Hebrew people from genocide, all begins because one woman made a decision to make a hard call in a very hard haul. In a culture that was everything against what she would do, she decides to make a choice. I'm going to count on coincidence. I'm going to believe that the gods or the God that maybe she'd heard about from the Hebrews living in the kingdom. Either way, she said, I'm going to weigh this and decide that maybe there's another king. Maybe there's another way. But here's the lesson from Vashti. We will never risk what we cannot live without. And when you come and find out what your toughest decisions are, I'll tell you for sure, the reason that situation is tough for you, even though it's not for me, and mine's not tough for you, is because our toughest hauls speak to our deepest kings and idols. And anything you can't live without has become your king. And Vashti is going to have to weigh some pretty heavy odds. Can she live without being the queen? There's a lot of self-worth tied up in being the queen. Can I live without the fame of being known as the king of the world's wife? And yet it's come with some downsides, but it comes with some upsides as well. Can I live without my chariots? Can I live without my palace? Can I live without my servants? This is everything she's weighing in this moment. And when she decides to do the refusal of Xerxes, she's basically saying, I'm going to risk this because I can live without all of it. There's something more important than the things in my life. So Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. And therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. And every tough call you're going to have to weigh. And almost always the weight of your success becomes the very thing that makes it a tough call. Because there's so much at stake. There's so much to lose. There's so much potential. And that weight of that success against this tough call, compromise a little. I'll fudge a little bit. It's nothing wrong with just a little bit of this. And in that moment, if you don't have the weight of another king in another kingdom, I don't know how you make the kind of decision that can be made here. I heard a CEO of Ford speak, Alan Mulally. It's interesting. He's a man of faith. Talked to a guy last night who worked with him during the times of him taking over, and said he would often come and say, hey, I want you to pray for us. We're going to ask for the largest, basically, company equity loan in U.S. history to put the whole company as collateral so we don't need a bailout. Pretty amazing how this man had confidence to come into the most difficult of circumstances and make some tough calls. He was first interviewed when he took the job. And at the interview, the newspaper reporters in Detroit said, what makes you think you're qualified to run Ford? You've never run an automobile company in your life. Did you know there's over 100,000 parts for each vehicle coming from all over the world? He paused for a second. He said, well, I used to work for Boeing, and we had over 1 million parts per plane that we had to assemble from all over the world. And that thing had to fly. And the place laughed. So here's a guy in the face of fear and anxiety and high stakes had a certain calm. The people I talked to last night who said they worked for him said, in contrast to some of the other folks they worked for who had a real sense of arrogance and narcissism, there was a humility and confidence that came from him. What's amazing is that in a time in history that was a real tough call, he made the decision not to take government bailouts. That was a very tough call. But more than that, he decided to change the culture of Ford. He said as he spoke that he talked to his senior management and they were going to start addressing problems, which was not part of the corporate culture. He decided to put grace and celebrate addressing issues together to change the culture. He also said that he told all of his senior leaders that they were going to start telling the Ford dealers who were selling the cars, not that they needed them, not that they liked them, not that they honored them, but the corporate culture he wanted to create was one of love. What do you mean? We're going to start telling the folks in our organization that we love them. He said, well, the first time he had his senior management, he gathered together all of the dealers from the different Ford plants, and they got together, and he said, we just have a message we want to tell you. And they've been doing this one-on-one, but as a group, he said he had all the engineers and everyone from senior management basically stand there and say, here's how we feel about you. And we love you. You know, it just couldn't have been more awkward. But what was he doing? He was taking a kingdom, a different kind of kingdom, a different kind of value system, and saying, we're going to put this in place in a kingdom that has not been this way. I don't know how you do that if you don't have a confidence in this other kingdom and this other king. And here's the good news. If you make a tough call, if you weigh all of it and you go, oh my goodness, the cost of this is going to be horrific, but I'm going to trust in this other kingdom, I will almost guarantee you that every time you make a tough call to come clean, every time you make a tough call to do the right thing, almost every time I can guarantee you that things will get worse. I wish that wasn't the case. That's why it's a tough call. Vashti makes this decision. What happens? Oh my goodness, they crank up the steam. Xerxes says, let's get some wise men here. What should we do about this? We got to control the whole world. This cannot be tolerated. He maligns her reputation. She's not only wronged the king, they exaggerate what's been done. It causes devastation for a short period of time. The princes and the people who are in the provinces of King Xerxes, they're going to hear about this. This is a violation of all of us. The queen's behavior is going to become known to all women. And then They create more fear in her life. So that they're going to despise all their husbands. There will be excessive contempt and wrath all over the kingdom. So it pleases the king. Let's make a royal decree go out from him. And let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes that each man should be master in his own house. Her decision caused devastation in the organization, in the Persian kingdom, anxiety, and we find out this man who looked so secure, this kingdom that seemed like it was so powerful, can be undone with one woman making a stand. And what we realize there is that the kingdom that seems so powerful is actually so unstable. But if we're going to be kingdoms of light and a kingdom of darkness, it's almost always going to get worse before it gets better. Vashti will never see how God uses her actions that we know. But here's what we can do. We can know for sure that it is no coincidence that your toughest calls occur down the toughest halls. And when you cannot see God working, when He seems silent, when the weight of the downside doesn't seem to in any way live up to the weight of the good side, God says, count on coincidence. Yes, it'll be tough for a while. But ultimately, I am watching and I am working, and I will use your decision to make the tough call in the tough hall, to form a deeper character in you, a deeper faith in me, and I will use it to transform the world. In some ways you'll know, and some you never will. And it's because of this decision in this moment when things got worse for her and everyone gathered around that God said this was the first of 100 positions and decisions I used to save the Hebrew people from an ancient version of Hitler 6 chapters from now. Count on coincidence. Father, thank you this morning for the reminder that you're at work in the silent times in our life, and give us confidence when you are silent to know that you are working providentially through the circumstances of our life. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for being here today. As you head out, grab yourself a booklet, sign up for some small groups, and we'll see you next week for chapter 2.